In this segment, I'm going to be transitioning some work that I did on the ECS that caused the passes through the ECS to be a bit coarse-grained, transition those to fine-grained passes. Let's say either the guy above me or the guy on the left want to perform an attack on me. Presumably their attack also has an animation, and similar to my attack's animation, that animation will allow the timers to update, the animation timers or the attack timers or things like that. However, they will stall all the other entities from being able to perform an action or perform movement until the attack animation is done. If this guy up here gets to move first before one of these two guys that attacks me, then these guys could actually be in the middle of an attack animation, but this guy's entity would be processed first in the pass through the ECS, and he would get to move, or he would get to attack me diagonally or something like that, but we don't want that to happen. If there's any animation related to an attack going on, we want that to stall or to pause the ability for any other entity to perform an action or take a move. Right now, we kind of intuit the state of the entity based on time left or like type in their animation. I think we're going to restructure the entity a little bit. We're going to track state explicitly outside of a cooldown. We have animation type, but this I guess would more be like entity state. In order to preserve our ability to compile as much as possible, I'll just duplicate this stuff and then deduplicate it later on. We update the entity view with the state. We'll also have to go update the component system, which we'll do down here, to add the state. And we need to go down to our initialize routines here and make entity view. We'll have to get the state as well. I think update states can still be a single procedure, but we're going to have multiple passes through the entities here. So one thing that we already do in common is we update the timers for a player, and we update the same timers for the other entities, which are just enemies right now. So we can have one pass through the ECS to just update timers. Just like we have this flag here, player finished a turn, we probably want to introduce a new flag, which is like entity performing action or something like that. And that way, when it comes time to loop through the entities and attempt to perform some sort of movement or an action, if this flag is set to true, not this flag, but the new flag for entity performing an action, then we can just skip that loop altogether because we want to wait for the action animation to finish. I think we're going to big bang this for the player and then compile and run it and just see what happens. If we are attacking and our timer is greater than 0, then we won't break. We will just update this new flag. Entity is performing an action. And so we will now get rid of this guy. But because we switch states here, we also set a new timer value. We could do a state transition to the idle state. So then we need to set the timer, and we set that to the animation idle cooldown. Now we'll get rid of all this logic. So now our timer doubles. It has two meanings, or whether we switch on the state. So if an entity is performing an action right above this part of the loop, then we won't even run this part of the loop here. So we no longer need to check if we're attacking. It might be naive of us, but we could probably just say if our timer is greater than 0, then continue. This is tricky because this is a move cooldown here. We might actually still need those two timers. So maybe we have an action timer and an animation timer. And then we just hoist the state, the animation type. This was kind of our entity state was kind of tied up in animation type here. We just hoist that out into a new component, which is state here. If we have time left on our action timer, then we just continue because we must have taken an action. Not taken an action, no, excuse me, because our state is going to be idle. It means that we moved. So idle is kind of a bad name for this, but we'll keep it as is for now. Okay, so here we now update the action timer, and then we also update the animation timer. And then we want to go through the entities here, and we say if we are a player, and our state is attacking, then if we have time left, the entity is some entity, which is us, is performing an action. Otherwise, we don't have any time left, so we transition to the idle state. We set the action timer. I guess this would be animation timer. Yeah, case attacking, we set the animation, or we check the animation timer. If the animation timer is greater than 0, then we are performing an action. Otherwise, we transition states, and the action timer now is our animation idle cooldown. So our action timer means different things depending on which state the entity is in. In this case, it is, oh, this is also wrong. Wow, getting complicated. It's going to be an animation timer. It's the animation timer that switches meanings. So if we're in the idle state, the animation timer is going to be looping, and it's going to be determining kind of which frame we use for our character to show him bobbing up and down. And we have finished a turn here. If we are in the idle state and we have run out of time on our animation timer, then we set the animation timer value back to animation idle cooldown. This is actually animation timer prop left S. If an entity is performing an action, then just return, and we'll just skip the update below. This is going to cause the enemies to behave strangely initially, but we just want to see if the player can update correctly. Maybe I shouldn't say entity is performing an action. Maybe that's what's confusing me. This is more like action animation is playing. And then when we come down here, we still have cooldown and we have animation components on the player. However, we're no longer updating these guys. So this is an action cooldown. So this would be action timer, prop left seconds. This we would do a state change here, right? So we'd say EV state is attacking, and then the animation timer would get the attack cooldown. And render is going to check our entity state to determine which tiles to render, and then it's also going to check the animation timer if we are in attacking. I guess it would check the animation timer even if we're not attacking, because that's going to be for the bobbing up and down idle animation right here. We cycle the timer there. Here, we also cycle the animation timer here. We don't need to do that anymore because we're phasing out the animation timer for the player. So the cooldown here, this is going to be an action timer. So we set the action timer to the run cooldown, which is going to be different because that's movement. That's going to be different than the action cooldown here. So you can see how we interpret the action timer to mean different things depending on which state we are in. It looks like the only thing in render entity with facing direction that was sensitive to cooldown is not in the immediate scope here, but it's probably just in get entity tile index. I can just handle the new logic specifically for the player here. This will be animation timer. So if the animation timer has more than half of the animation idle cooldown left, we render one sprite, otherwise we render another. So I think here I just update timer like this. It's not going to be prop timer, it's just prop left seconds. Okay, we get a segfault. Let's go check out what initialize player is trying to do here. Oh, we're dereferencing action timer. So that's probably, so for example, if I print this action timer, that's probably null. Yep. I do have those properties in the entity view type definition, but I just didn't add them to make entity view. Okay, so we have transitioned the player, we have weaned them off of cooldown and animation, and we've introduced a state, and we have also introduced an animation timer and an action timer. Okay, I am attacking right now, as you can tell. However, we're not playing anything, so that is broken. I think that's broken because if we go into the render, we check out render, we do the special render animation guy here. We'll generalize this later, but for now, let's just go fix it. So I'm checking animation prop here. This will be a problem. This is animation timer. So we will switch on the, not the prop type, the state. It's really the EV state. Then we would check this, animation timer. If that is greater than half of the attack cooldown, then pick sword swing start, otherwise pick sword swing end. Let's compile and run that. Oh, we're just not rendering that thing here. If EV animation prop type is attack, so it's actually state, right? If EV state is attacking, we should now see the attacking animation, and there it is. Okay, so the player's been weaned off of cooldown and off of animation. So now we'll go back to the enemies, and we'll perform the same thing for the enemies. Now attacking, we don't support attacking yet. I might just kind of leave this as is. We are going to support attacking animations for the enemies, but just not quite yet. So let's now get rid of cooldown and animation. Make sure we're not using these anywhere. So get rid of cooldown, get rid of animation. Oh, there's actually some important detail here we need to capture, right? We actually set left seconds here. That's why this is formatted differently than the player. We set left seconds to be some random number, essentially, between the max idle cooldown and 0. And we do that just so that way not everybody's bobbing up and down at the same time like it's DDR. So we'll preserve that. All right, these guys are now operating on the new state and timers. Now, another thing that I was talking about doing was passing in the delta time since last frame. What do I set delta since last frame to be on the very first frame? We have two things that we can do. The first thing that we can do is just work on the enemy animations and the enemy attacks. We can animate those and then stall while the enemies are attacking, prevent movement or actions from other people while the enemies are attacking, or we can propagate. I do that refactor and propagate in time since last frame update. I think the more interesting thing is working on rendering, so we'll focus on that. So right now we have this hard-coded render thing for rendering player attacking. I think we want to generalize this. As you can see here, when I do an attack, the attack gets rendered over with a tad of opacity over the map or the other entities here. We might want to actually make two passes. First render all entities and then go through the entities again and then call render animation perhaps. So we'll say for entities here again, components dot state edit index dot prop is not equal to attacking, then continue. So we make the entity view not for player index, but for it index. Something kind of strange is going to happen here. Right now I allow diagonal attacks, but I don't allow diagonal facing direction. So when I do finish this, we should see enemies that are diagonal from me attacking either vertically or horizontally, even though I'm diagonal. I will still take damage. The graphic will play vertically or horizontally. So right now I have drawn an attack for the player that is rightward facing. You can imagine the sword coming out of this hand right here, swinging this direction. And so this guy here, this is the ghost attack. It's like a scratch or something like that. This guy here. I guess I meant it to be rightward facing. It's not entirely clear, and it probably doesn't even really matter for starters. This is all programmer art. So we're going to take this one tile here, and what we do is with render texture rotated, based on the facing direction, I will change the orientation of this enemy attack here. I will need to update the get animation tile for the enemy. Big Atlas index animation scratch, I guess. This will be a U64, and the tile is going to be 31. And we just always return this. In fact, we don't even look at the animation timer prop because we only have one animation there. I think we do some sort of fading here on the alpha, right? Yeah, so the alpha gets faded with time. We do look at the animation timer, and we just take a ratio of how much is left versus how much is total and multiply that by maximum alpha to slowly fade down to a completely transparent. I do not see any attacks from him, so we might need to debug that. Oh, I don't think we do a state transition. This is an attack right here. So we need to do a state transition. We can just nab that from up here. Yeah, so you saw a situation there, right, where one ghost appeared to have attacked another ghost. He actually attacked me, but because you can't, like there it is, because you can't attack diagonally, or you can't face diagonally in this game, he is attacking me, but his animation's playing over the other ghost there. I want to make this really long and drawn out. I want to make sure that I can't move during the ghost animation. So we'll go to the animation attack cooldown, and we'll set this to 1 second. This is going to be super dramatic. Oh, interesting. Holding down the attack button, I was able to position lock the enemy. So if I just hold down the attack button here, I position lock them. But if I go back and I restore the value to something very low, which is less than the action cooldown, that's probably the key here. I think the enemies can still take an action after I perform my action. And indeed they can. So I do have a latent defect there with timing mismatches. So the last thing that I'll do, I think, for this segment is in the timer here, we'll get rid of the last perf count. We need to store the last perf counter across frames. So that will be in the game state. We will basically just go yoink that from last perf count from timer and put that in the game state. So game state, we have the perf frequency, last perf count. So we will set the last performance counter here. And this is what's going to allow us to have a non-zero. So then down here, we'll update the game state dot time since last frame seconds. Game state right here, time since last frame seconds. Game state now contains the time since last frame s, so we don't need to be computing this every single frame. Get rid of get precise dt. Don't need this. And then update timer. I guess we can have a dt here. dt, which is a float 32. And if we have time left on the timer, then just subtract dt. Don't need the perf count. Update timer. Okay, it's so short we can just inline that. Update timer, game state, dot, time since last frame, seconds. We no longer have a last perf count on the action timer, but we do need to set as to true. So I think we just get rid of all this stuff here. Why was this? Why is this so fast? Oh, yeah, I know why. So after I compute time since last frame, I also need to update yes, last perf count. Okay, cool. So that, the enemies, that's interesting. They're really lagging. I would love the ability just to diff the code, but of course I didn't make a commit or anything like that after I got the last thing working. The number of changes wasn't so big though. So I actually maybe just want to undo some stuff at the effect, or at the risk of just completely hosing this. I seem to still actually have the issue here as well. So it wasn't related to my change, my most recent change. It was related to my second to most recent change. I might have a bad cooldown for one of their actions. We just commented out some code here that helped us narrow down the problem. So let's see what's going on when we do attack. So what happens if I just change this to be like a little bit less than the animation attack cooldown? Or in fact, you know, I'll just make it the animation attack cooldown. Okay, yeah, now they're much tighter. Okay, so that's the issue. I'm just kind of growing a bunch of cooldowns as I implement these features. I'll need to kind of rethink that to make everything more uniform. But the issue was that they took an action and we said you have to wait half a second if you take an action, but your attack animation only plays for 0.15 seconds. And so these guys basically finished their attack, but they still were not allowed to attack or move again. Meanwhile, the player was kind of off doing their own thing. We'll just call this enemy action cooldown, and we'll just make it 015 for now. Or, you know what, even better, I'll probably do this. Make it the animation attack. Just make it the animation attack cooldown for now. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing some Jai. Have a good rest of the day, and peace.